Welcome to the Champs App podcast. Champs App is your recruiting and development co-pilot. If you are a player, parent, or coach, make sure to check out more content and tools to help navigate the world of youth hockey at champs.app. Also, if you've listened to the Champs App podcast in the past and it has helped you with your recruiting or hockey development, please tell your teammates and friends about Champs App. It would be even better if you subscribe to the podcast and review or rate us on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on. On today's episode, I chat with Kris Hogg, who is the head coach of the Rink Hockey Academy girls prep team. We discuss his junior and professional playing career, how girls hockey works in Western Canada, go into detail on Rink Hockey Academy, and discuss recruiting both into RHA and moving on to college hockey. This was a very informative conversation with Kris, so I hope you enjoy it. Before we get to this amazing episode, most folks don't know all the great ways that Champs App can be your hockey recruiting and development co-pilot. So we thought we'd highlight different areas of Champs App in each episode. Today, we're spotlighting Champs Plus, where you can access an extensive library of recruiting and hockey development knowledge, packed with expert insights, guidance, and resources. With Champs Plus, you can join monthly webinars featuring expert discussions on key recruiting topics, submit questions ahead of time, and get answers live. In the app, our age-specific playbooks provide a roadmap for girls aiming to play women's college hockey. Champs Plus offers over 60 exclusive videos and 30 articles with new content added weekly. Take a free tour today to browse the full list of resources. You can subscribe monthly or save with an annual plan at a deeply discounted rate. We are also now offering group discount rates for teams, clubs, and schools. Visit Champs Plus now to get expert recruiting advice and player development insights at a fraction of the cost of hiring a personal advisor. I'm very excited to welcome Kris Hogg, head coach of the Rink Hockey Academy Kelowna girls prep team. Originally from Sycamus, British Columbia, Kris played junior hockey in the Western Hockey League for the Kamloops Blazers and Lethbridge Hurricanes. He then went on to play university hockey at Lakehead University. After a pro career in North America and Europe, he joined the RHA predecessor organization, Pursuit of Excellence, in 2015, and is now in his 8th season as the head coach of the girls team. Welcome to the podcast, Kris.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, why don't we start off like we do all of our guests, just saying how you started playing hockey in British Columbia in Sycamus, which I hadn't ever heard of before doing my research on you, but I do know it's about an hour and a half north of where you are now in Kelowna. So maybe just talk about playing hockey as a kid and getting pretty good enough to play junior hockey.
Yeah, for sure. Sycamus, like you said, it's not everybody knows that community. It's a very small town of 2,000 people. So again, the access that I had as a young kid to the arena to be able to get on the ice with all my friends and gain access almost every single day was unparalleled compared to big cities, right? So I think that was the one thing when I was growing up that I was able to kind of really be able to utilize the community and utilize the ice a lot more than if I was in a bigger city. So I think that was one thing that kind of propelled my career, but I also grew up with a lot of NHL players as well within my age group. Shea Weber is also from Sycamus. Cody Franson, who was an NHL defenseman for a lot of years in the NHL as well. And we all ended up going to the Western League and all ended up getting drafted to the NHL and going through our careers, right? So I think the biggest thing, like when I was young, we had a good core group of kids. And back then, it's not like we had, 4 lines and 60. It's like we had 12 skaters and maybe 1 goalie per team. So you're getting lots of ice, you're getting lots of reps, and your access to ice was, every single day, right? Cody Franson's dad, Shea Weber's dad were actually the arena attendants. So they were able to let us in early for practices, let us stay out later. It's kind of a unique thing when you grow up in a small Canadian town that you do have access like that, right? So I think growing up, it was just something that all of us kids got along so well. We're able to build those relationships and those friendships, and we just love competing against each other, right? So as we continue to grow older and older throughout our minor hockey days, we started getting better and better and bigger and stronger, and ended up really being able to utilize the skills that we had to be able to push ourselves to bigger and better things, right? So again, throughout minor hockey, We've had some very, very good teams win provincial championships with 12 skaters against, bigger communities like Kelowna, right? So it just was kind of like one of those things where a small community had a good group of kids that continued to grow and continue to like push each other that way. So it
Got a
was really
question for you.
cool.
Got a
Yeah.
question for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously you're getting a huge amount of ice time. You're playing with some really good players around you. What do you think like contributed to you being such a good hockey player beyond just getting the ice time? Like, were you getting the coaching? Were you getting the skills development, or was it just a lot of shinny hockey of just getting out there and skating around and just learning by doing?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Like it's funny you kind of mentioned that, right? And when you're looking at, the NHL now and all these older players that are retired now are like, well, kids don't really just get in the arena and get to do what they want and build the joy of the game, right? It's always like you're on for your hour ice time and it's very strategic and it's very to a point and you got to go here, you got to go there, right? I think for us as kids, it was just building those habits, right? Yes, we did have very good coaches. A lot of the adults in that community were able to come out on the ice and be able to help us throughout there. So yeah, we did have coaches. A lot of them were parent coaches, but a lot of our parents did play professionally and things like that as well, right? So we just had a really good parent group that would come out and help and teach. But then again, like you said, because we had unlimited access to ice, there was times where we would just have open ice and be able to practice the things that you don't normally get to practice, right? I know for, like Shea and Cody or defensemen, they're just like pumping out tons of reps of point shots, right? So obviously, as they get older, their shots become better than those other kids around them. They're able to utilize the blue line and be able to do that. And for myself, I was a high scorer, so I just was always able to kind of like play shinny and find different angles of things and be able to work on things that normally you might not have time to do as well, right? So I think it is a combination of both. I think that the amount of ice gave us enough creativity to do what we needed to do and be creative and continue to build our skills. And I think we had enough coaching and guidance that allowed us to utilize those habits and how to use them in a game, right? So it is kind of unique. And when I think back to it, it's just like, it's hard to pinpoint one thing over the other, but I just feel that, we're able to do both. We're always super competitive too when we did anything. So I think that just helps push things too, right? Nowadays, you do a lot of one-on-one coaching and stuff like that. And unfortunately, the game's played with 10 players on the ice and two goalies in a net, right? Like you can do all the one-on-one stuff you want, but if you can't score in a game and utilize the other four players on the ice with you, you're not going to be able to get very far, right? So I think that's one thing that young hockey kind of taught me, like minor hockey kind of taught me was being able to utilize the players around you and being able to read and react to them as well, right? I think I've kind of brought that into my coaching ability as well. I got like a photographic memory of knowing what players are. So when I'm on the ice, I know like if I'm not looking at the player to put it in front of them, put it behind them. When I coach, it's the same thing. Like when I'm coaching against other teams, I know exactly what hands the other players on the other teams are, what faceoffs, where the faceoffs are, how to line up, things like that. So I guess it's like kind of like a little tick that I have. But it was just like at a young age, I was able to kind of like understand that. It's the same. Like I finished watching The Last Dance there the other time. But Dennis Rodman, how he's like, this guy shoots like this off the boards, it goes here, I rebound like that. I think for us as kids too, it was like we had so much time and opportunity to do that. We kind of figured out like where each other were and how to do this and how to do that. And I think that's one thing that might be missing in the game as kids get older. But again, that was a big thing and a big influence for me to continue to be good at minor hockey and continue that into junior.
Gotcha. So us talk about junior hockey. Obviously, you played at a couple of teams. Kamloops Blazers are obviously very well known, and Lethbridge Hurricanes also a pretty good team historically. Obviously, at that time, you probably thought your goal was probably to play in the NHL. Maybe just talk about your time in junior hockey, and then how you started realizing where your dream of playing in the NHL was going.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, coming from a a small community. As a 16-year-old, back in the Western League days, it wasn't very often that 16-year-olds come in and play in the Western League, right? Typically, it was an older league. You had 17, 18-year-olds, even 19-year-olds come in the league as rookies, right? Whereas nowadays, you get drafted, you sign your contract, and then it's kind of guaranteed that you'll kind of play on the team. So the game has kind of changed and evolved, and that's something that I went through, as I'll continue to talk about with my junior going into pro and things like that. But I would say at a 16-year-old year, it was kind of funny. And it leads into my coaching and into all the girls that I coach and the adversity that you'll face. I actually didn't even want to play in the Western League, if I was being completely honest. I went to, there was a team called Salmon Arm Silverbacks, which is a BCHL team. And I went and I wanted to play there. It was close to my hometown. I could live in Sicamous, drive to Salmon Arm. So as a 16-year-old, I went there and tried out, and I was like, it was like make the team or go home, right? And right out of the gates, I got cut from that team, and the BCHL was older back then too, so maybe my hopes were a little bit too high. But once I got cut from that team, I was still listed by the Kamloops Blazers, so I had to go and try out for them and just go through the process, right? And I ended up actually getting cut from a BCHL team and then making a Western League team, which is like,
Yeah.
that's like,
For folks who don't know, the WHL is higher than the BCHL in terms of the overall caliber of play that most people would assess. Yeah.
that would be like going to play for my U18 team here at RHA Kelowna, and I get cut, and then all of a sudden Vermont calls me and I'm playing NCAA, right? Like it just is like unprecedented that usually happens, right? So as a 16-year-old, I just, had a good camp, listened to the coaches, right place, right time, right organization. That has a lot to do with what happens in hockey as well. They were going through a little bit of a youth movement and ended up making the team as a 16-year-old, right? So throughout that process, I don't think I really ever thought so far ahead, in terms of, you asked about like the NHL and that becoming a dream. As a 16-year-old, I did have my struggles, just like a freshman going into college would have theirs as well, right? Like I was bottom of the totem pole. I played on the fourth line. I would consider myself, if I got 3 shifts in a game, that was a good game for me. Played in the first, second, and third, I would consider that's a great game. If I played 2 shifts, that was an okay game. If I played 1 shift, maybe I was like, okay, but that's the way it was for rookies back then. But I think for me, and something that I preach, obviously, when I coach as well, is I got to play and I got to practice with great coaches and be on the ice with great players, right? I had Scotty Upshaw, who was a 6th overall pick to Nashville back then. We had a lot of NHL picks. Eric Christensen was the leading scorer in the Western League the year after. So all of these guys, I was able to practice against, I was able to play with. And I think I was just really able to hone my skills, right? I think there's always the debate of, less ice time, but the development time in practice, or do you go somewhere and play lots at a lower level and hone your skills in gameplay, right? So, for me, I don't think there was really much of a choice. I kind of got thrown into it, like I mentioned before, but I was really able to kind of hone my skills and play and practice against all these guys that are on world junior teams or that are going to the NHL in years after. And I started to feel really good about myself. I started to I was able to be strong mentally, to not let ice time affect me, not let points affect me. I was a 16-year-old living out a Canadian dream, moving to a town, playing for a historic franchise. The community support was so good from everyone in the community, the teachers at the school. It was just a really unique experience that I just didn't really ever think of the negatives, to be honest. Like there always are a lot, but I'm a pretty positive guy as it goes throughout. I think that's what I try to instill a little bit here as well. But going into that, I didn't think it was much of a possibility. And then, it went to my 17-year-old year after that. And, a couple of those guys moved on to the NHL. There was opportunity to move up the lineup, and I kind of took advantage of that, right? Like I didn't set as many goals of like, hey, I need to score this or I need to do this. I just said, like, listen, I got to be, when I'm on the ice, I got to be the most energetic player, and I got to be moving my feet at all times. And I kind of utilized my strengths that way. And after my 17-year-old year, I went from being an undrafted Western League kid to being the highest draft pick on my team and the highest draft pick almost out of BC. Right. So it's like, other kids got drafted higher than me. Other kids, were
Are you
playing
referring
as
to the
16.
NHL?
Yes.
Yeah. So
So again, within 1 year, you go from a walk-on into being drafted. I'm flying to the NHL draft. I'm doing the combine with like all the top prospects. I have like Alexander Ovechkin working out right next to me. So it's a very unique experience. Like I think it just like it never really set in for me. And if I grow up with like Shea Weber and Cody Franson, like those guys are prominent NHL guys. It's not like I go into a place and think like, oh, I don't belong here, or oh, those guys are NHL. Like everyone is human being, just like me and you. And I just like I don't really get too starstruck around people like that, and especially growing up and playing against them in the Western League too, right? So it was just like a unique experience that once I got drafted, then things start to change a little bit that way for sure.
all right. So you had a few stints in the ECHL. You played in Europe for a little bit. When did you decide that it was time to move on past being a player and move into the coaching ranks?
Yeah, and those are always hard, things year to year. You're always trying to see where things will go, what organizations need certain things. Like I loved my time in Europe. It was really cool to be able to experience different countries, to travel. So I think I just needed to continue to see if the pro ranks would work out, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, right? Injury bugs always catch up. There's always lingering things that happen that way, but I knew I always wanted to stay involved in hockey. I had a huge passion for it. I love being in the arena. I love being around the kids. I love being, around teammates. So for me, I think it just got to a point I was, engaged at that time too. So to be able to do long distance was not as much of an option. And I think at that time, I just wanted to continue to stay involved in hockey. So I decided, here in Kelowna, academies started to become a kind of a prevalent thing here in Western Canada. And I thought it was a good opportunity for me to kind of like transition from being a player to continue to still be on the ice and be involved in hockey, right? So right away, I was able to kind of retire at the end of the year and hop into like summer camps with the organization, which was called Pursuit of Excellence, right? And become a coach and see if I liked it, right? I think there wasn't really much of a transition. I missed it for sure. And yeah, every kid wants to lift the Stanley Cup over their head and, do that thing. But at some point in time, the window closes, and the window closes quick. Nowadays, for me, that was like, 24, 25, 26, 27. It's like nowadays, if kids are 22, you might not play in the NHL. It's just like crazy how much times have changed. But for me, it just like became evident that I just was going to continue to, I shouldn't say waste years, but just spend years traveling or spend years kind of spinning your tires at a dream that might not ever happen, right? It just is like becoming a young man's game. As I went through that process, the game changed. It wasn't like an older, stronger, tougher league. It was like more speed and quickness and transition. So it was just like hockey changed, and you have to change with it or you're not going to keep up, right? So I think my body just wasn't able to keep up at that time. But then it just was, like I said, I was able to kind of stay involved and see if I wanted to try 1 year to see if I even like coaching. You never know if you do or if you don't. And funny story, like I started on the guy side, right? Like I was a coach for a midget team here at the academy my first year. Chase Sakic, Joe Sakic's kid was in our academy, so I got to coach him. My first year, Joe Hoffer, who's a goalie in the NHL with the St. Louis Blues, was on our team as well, right? He was just a young kid in the academy. And, when I was with the guys side, it was just like it opened up my eyes. I really enjoyed it. I loved being around those kids. I loved teaching the skills of hockey. And it just like kept me active in it. And I think like the one thing for me, like I have lots of good ideas. I'm super energetic. And after that first year happened, the next year I wanted to kind of like hop into head coaching, and the only position that was open was on the female side, right? And
Yeah.
the year before we had lots of females that would come out and skate with us at the academy. You combine a lot of things, right? So for me, it was like I just wanted to kind of get my hand into head coaching and just see if like it's one thing to be an assistant coach and you're more like trying to put out fires and you're helping the head coach and whatever they can do, but as a head coach you're kind of like taking a lot of responsibility, right? Like that's where the hammer lies. And you're dealing a lot more with parents, a lot more with ice time, a lot more with the decisions that come at a bigger expense, and that you have to kind of explain and think through. So for me, I just wanted that experience. And now I'm on year 8. Like I said, it just was something that now I'm on the girls' side and can't seem to get out of, right?
Well, you're obviously doing quite well because you know you're one of the top producing programs in the country for producing NCAA players. So let's get before we get into specifically the Rink Hockey Academy. I'm just not as familiar with Western Canadian hockey for girls hockey. Maybe you could just talk about how BC girls hockey works. Like, is it all in the Vancouver area, like within a 2-hour radius? I know there's the Delta Hockey Academy, Okanagan, Shawinigan Lake. Maybe also Vancouver Comets or some of the big programs. Maybe just talk about how that all works. And you know, I don't, you know, in California we have a density issue where it's just hard to get everywhere. There's not enough players, so you know the few teams that they have, you know, are highly concentrated, or people leave and go elsewhere. I know you're kind of a magnet of a program where people come from all over Canada, but maybe just talk about how you know BC hockey works for on the girls' side.
Yeah, for sure. And when we talk about like Western Canada, I think each province is a little different. You have to like understand the provinces and how things work. But essentially, in a province and in a Western province, you have two streams you can go once you hit the midget level, right? So you have academy hockey, which is like Canadian Sports School Hockey League, which is kind of a combination of school and hockey together. And then you have AAA hockey, which is like your travel hockey, right? So in BC, yeah, the communities are kind of spread out a little bit for sure. And there's a greater concentration in the Vancouver area because it's just a big city for sure. But what kind of happens and what is gone on in BC is that the CSSHL, there's been a few more additions of those teams, and it seems to be an option for more BC kids because you get more of those rural kids. Like I was a kid from Sicamous, so if I grew up in Sicamous nowadays, I probably would go to an academy and have to bill it and things like that, right? So the landscape has kind of changed in BC because kids are from all over, and in order to get the training and to get the schooling and to continue to like elevate your game as a hockey player in BC, sometimes you know it's just farther to get to places. So academies have kind of taken over the AAA side because on the AAA side, sometimes you don't have billet programs. Sometimes it takes a long time to get to and from the ranks. You have to go to school all day and then go to practice at night, and then you got to hire a trainer and things like that. Whereas a hockey academy is almost a one-stop shop, right? You show up at the girls are here at 8 o'clock in the morning. We're done at 4 o'clock. They're at home, resting, relaxing. They got their billets cooking them meals. They're doing their homework and they're getting ready for the next day. So it's typical more of like a college lifestyle where you're like getting everything done in your one day. You know, your parents don't have to provide a trainer or provide extra skill sessions and things like that. So in BC, that's kind of like the landscape of what is kind of changed a little bit. And I would say that like, you know, a lot of younger kids will start in AAA and then they'll end up in an academy by their grade 11s, grade 12s. Now, Alberta's different, Sask's different, Manitoba's different. I can go all day about what I know and how everything works that way. But I would say in BC, typically most of your kids will go up to AAA and then they will graduate on to CSSHL. Just because now you can go out to tournaments that are further away. Your budgets are probably a little bit bigger, and then you get a little bit more exposure. That's been the problem in Western Canada. I think most of those um, teams are very good and players are very good. They just don't get the exposure. So if you don't get out east very often, you might not play in the NCAA. That's just the way it is.
Gotcha. All right. So now let's just talk about how Rink Hockey Academy evolved. Obviously, we mentioned a couple of times that Pursuit of Excellence was the predecessor from an organizational name. Maybe just talk about you know that transition, and then maybe get into you know your specific organization of being based in Kelowna, and also I believe your rink is in Lake Country. So
Yeah, for sure. So um, I guess from the start, it's like Pursuit of Excellence was kind of like the original company here in Kelowna, right? So that's where I first started on the guy side and then went over to the girl side. The academy has always been one female team and five male teams. So there's always six teams here within our academy, and we've done a good job even on the guy side of providing you know players to the Western League and then onto the NHL, right? So there's just been kind of a little bit of a factory in Kelowna area for being able to draw families and draw people here. But I guess from the pursuit of excellence standpoint, they've been here for a long time. So we're really embedded in the community. It's the same school, same principals, same teachers, same academic counselors that we've used for years, exactly like how Shattuck would be set up with their schooling. We've done the same thing with our schooling on this side. So the schooling has been set for a long time. So you have people that are knowledgeable and that have seen everything. We have established billet programs. So to be able to get kids from out of town and be able to billet them within the community and be able to provide a place for them allows for us to be able to recruit from kind of all over as well, right? So, in terms of pursuit of excellence, they laid a great foundation. And as it went older, our owner, David Roy, was getting a little bit older as well. And once you get older, I think you look to kind of pass the torch a little bit or look for a sale. And, Pursuit of Excellence was continuing to provide great service in the academy stream. And then that's where we got purchased by Rink, right? So Rink kind of comes in and nothing, like it's a tough saying to say, but nothing really changes, right? Like we have a new facility here, but we still use community rinks. We still use the same school. So we're still kind of on the same system. Things will constantly change and there's different management and different ways of doing things for sure from the business standpoint. But
And yeah, and you
I
have those
think
wonderful, red tracksuits that everybody
yes,
wears.
exactly. So when you can get seen on the ice, it's always a plus there too, right? So, but I think with Rink kind of taking over, it just they allowed the female program always was pretty strong. We had lots of players within our Pursuit of Excellence program, and Rink wanted to continue to stay that way here. They didn't want to change too much. They knew what was working out here, and they just want to continue to provide support for us to be able to put out a competitive team and continue to push girls to bigger and better places for sure.
Gotcha. All right. So maybe just talk about the facilities. You have your own kind of training facility, and then you have your rink where you play games. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So like you can kind of think of it like a triangle. You got your home base, which is like where I'm at right now, which is our training center, which has classrooms, which has skill center, and has our gym and our offices, right? So that's kind of like our home base is what you would call it, where a lot of stuff happens throughout the day. In that triangle, we have our home arena, which is behind you, I can see, which is Winfield Arena, right? And that is located 2-minute walk to the school. So they're almost side by side. So literally they're going either from our training center to the arena or into the school that's right beside each other, right? So that's kind of our rotation of what happens in a day. And from our training center, it's about a 7-minute drive to the arena and to the school, right? So it's all combined in a small area. Lake Country is a community that's part of Kelowna. It's like kind of attached to Kelowna, right? So it's very, very close. But it is a little bit smaller of a community, and we've been using the school in Lake Country for years. So it's just a natural fit for us to be able to use that community rank to be able to be ingrained in the community, to be able to have our girls. I think a big thing for them too is being introduced into a public school, right? Sometimes what happens at an academy is they do online schooling or they sit in a classroom with the same 20 girls all throughout the year. So they're not like integrated within the school or the community. So sometimes you miss that sense of community and like how to interact with other people, not just your teammates. Because once you get to college, as you know, it's like, you go to Ohio State, you're dealing with the entire Ohio State community. You're not just dealing with your like girls hockey team, right? So I think for us, it's really good to be embedded in the community for those girls to get a good sense of community when they come to Kelowna. It's a very beautiful area. It's an area that I think is a destination for a lot of families. So a really easy area for people to want to come live or want to come to school or want to come train, right? So from that perspective there, that's how it kind of looks like for what we use for our facilities and what's available to us.
Gotcha. And talk about the travel schedule because at least I know if you're from the middle of Canada, like you're on a bus a heck of a lot, and occasionally you're flying to Ontario, you're flying out to BC. What's it like for you guys? Do you have some density to stay a lot home? Obviously, I know you're going to the NIT coming up very shortly in Minnesota. You're going to the Stony Creek ones, but how many times are you flying versus driving and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, we play, girls hockey, especially in Western Canada. And for us, I've kind of like it's like a mad science for me. And every year I'm kind of like maneuvering the schedule as see fit, right? In Canada, we do national championships. It'll come out here within the next couple of days, but 15 of my 20 skaters are playing in provincial championships for their respective provinces, right? So I got one Czech Republic player that already plays on the national team. I got a USA girl that was at Team USA camp. And then I got a couple kids that are ineligible to play for their provincial teams or they're too young, right? So, having 15 players have to take 2 weeks off for national championships, right? That comes up in November. So I kind of look at the schedule and see where are prime opportunities for us to A, get exposure, B, play the best teams, and C, be able to get enough rest within our schedule, right? Because within the CSSHL, we have a league that plays about 30 games plus a playoff weekend. So you're looking at like 35 to 40 games in that schedule. And typically they've built it pretty good. We have we bus within BC, and there's a lot of academies in BC to play your flex games, which are your home and away games. But we also do showcases, which are like tournaments. So all the teams in the Western Canada, we just had one in Penticton. They all come to Penticton. All 12 teams are there. Hockey Canada, Hockey USA. All the schools can fly in. They can see you on that weekend. You go back to your place, right? So with the way that schedule works, typically all of that is for bus for us. Calgary's about a 6.5 hour bus. Vancouver's about a 3 hour bus. So it's all pretty close. In Western Canada, 3 hours is like a close. That's like me closing my eyes, I wake up, I'm there, right? Like for other people, that might not be. If you play in Minnesota or if you play in Boston, it's all pretty close. But for us,
Toronto, yeah.
that's just what I grew up on, right? Like that's an easy drive for sure. So again, our travel schedule is pretty good that way, but then it's just looking at the schedule and trying to see where we can see fit, right? Stony Creek's a great event for us at the start of the year to get our exposure, to play in front of Hockey Canada, Hockey USA, and to match yourselves up against the best competition, right? Typically, most teams come to Stony Creek, so that's one where you really want to like compare yourselves compared to other girls, and when you're trying to go through the scholarship route. NIT is great because it gets you to the States. You get to see St. Thomas and University of Minnesota's right there. So hopefully you can catch a practice, see a game, those types of things to go there. But it gets you exposure to some of the WCHA spots. And then it gets you those games against the top US teams. We get to play Selects, Mission, Shattuck, and those makeshift Minnesota All-Star Mortgage and those teams that are those all-star teams that kind of come together in the elite league, right? So for us, it just gives us a little bit different competition and to see what's out there internationally as well. We go to Kitchener right before Christmas. That's a good one for our Hockey Canada girls or girls to get seen before Hockey Canada does their selections. And then usually we try to add tournaments in the second half. We host one actually in Kelowna, which will be a great event this year that we get a lot of teams out to. And typically we'll fly to another event. So typically you're looking at like 25 to 30 games that are your tournaments and makeshift weekends. And then you got 35 to 40 games in your CSSHL. So it actually matches up pretty well. And as I look at the schedule, I try to give a weekend off once a month, right? Like, so you're trying to make it so the girls can have a weekend where they're just catching up on their studies, their rest, their bodies can recover on those types of things. But to say that it isn't busy and chaotic, I would say the first half is, right? Like this is the only weekend we've had off. We go to NIT, we play home games, and then those 15 girls are going to national championships in New Brunswick. So it's a busy first half, but that's the way how college kind of is, and that's when all those college teams are kind of recruiting is all in the first half as well, right?
Yeah. And so, like I mentioned earlier, you're one of the your program produces one of the top teams in terms of producing NCAA players, definitely in the top five. A couple of players that you've had in the last few years, Jade Aginla, who's now at Brown. Obviously, her dad has been involved in Rink Hockey Academy. And then also Chloe Primerano did some amazing things with the under 18 team. I'm just curious in terms of with Chloe, when I interviewed Brad Faust back in June, he made no mention that she was going to be starting this past September. But I'm curious when you found out that Chloe was going to actually be leaving a year early and graduating early from high school to go play at Minnesota.
Well, I don't know the exact date. I think at Christmas time, it was spoken about. I think Minnesota kept it open to Chloe, and you never know how a kid's going to jump into a world championship and do and those types of things. She's an elite talent for sure, and but sometimes those events go your way and sometimes they don't go your way, right? It depends who your partners are. It depends if you get sick. It depends if you get injured. All those types of things. And obviously, I know Chloe's going to do well. She at the U18 level, she can manipulate the game like no other kid I've seen in the past couple of years, but I think at Christmas time, I had a good chat with the family and just kind of left the door open, right? Like I think for her, she's always looking to like get to that next step and what is going to be the best way there. And we just didn't put any pressure on the situation. It was like if she wants to come back, she can come back. If she wants to go somewhere else, if she wants to play in Europe for a year before she goes, if she wants to go to Minnesota, like at the end of the day, like my job is to prepare her the best I can for the next season, right? So regardless if that was for Minnesota, it's you got to take the feedback that you get from Hockey Canada, the feedback she got from TBC, feedback she gets from me and my assistant coaches here, and put it all together and try to make her the best player possible, right? So again, for me, it's like it's always nice to have her around, and I coached her for 2 years and they were both great years. But at the end of the day, she's ready for the next jump. And I think like she's ready for the next challenge in the stage in her career. So, it probably would have been springtime. I probably would have known maybe before in March at some point in time. But again, Chloe has to graduate high school. So it's like based on if she graduates. So that's probably why Minnesota can't do it, because if she fails a class or two or doesn't get it done in time and the application closes, now you can't go a year early, right? So I think it was all on the basis of those types of things. But for me, it's, like it's on to the next one. I think the biggest thing is like, we did it at POE. We had, 1 year, Ann Shirkowski, Derek Gregg, Daniel Serdachny, who's next in line for Hockey Canada and just scored the golden goal. It's like all those kids have played for me for a lot of years. And I think early on, I realized like I was kind of like always stuck in the past. It's like, like you graduate those players. And when I was a young coach, maybe a little bit foolish and not eyes wide open. But it's like you look back and then you start the next year and you're like, well, I don't have, Serdachny can't like I don't have a girl but you have to keep looking into the future because the kids that come through, it's like you have to give them your all, you have to give them 100%. And these girls are all great players and they'll all rise up to the challenge, right? So for me, it's like we kind of Chloe graduated early, but I've been eyes wide open right away. And I had a couple kids that got invited to Hockey Canada camp, or kids that are 07s that just like got underlooked, and we ended up going to Stony Creek and it was just eyes wide open. It's like, hey guys, like this is your team now, and we kind of like we're just gonna roll. And we go there and they have something to prove, and we ended up going to Stony Creek. Like you never go into a tournament like, yeah, I'm competitive and want to win everything, but at the end of the day, you're just taking it a day at a time. And the girls that I had this year kind of like they didn't look back, and it's just like a sense of them kind of taking over the leadership. And I think that's the big thing that changed for me was like being able to know that once you graduate those kids, you really got to focus on the next group that comes in and really cherish your time with those kids. It's like I look too much in the past, and it's like you're coaching minor hockey and you're just trying to get these kids to the bigger and better things, right? So I think it really changed my mindset and was able to like keep producing kids year after year. It's like some kids come to your program and that they're going to be good and move on to the next level, but I also bring in kids in grade 9 that it's like I know I need to do work with them. I need to give them proper ice time. I have to, shield some minutes, but I also have to give them rope to be able to make mistakes too, right? And it's like that's what's kind of kept our program continuing to go, is because we just look to the future. It's like once Stony Creek was done, it's like we're on to the next weekend. Next weekend was done, it's like we're looking at NIT. It's like we don't ever look back, we always look forward, right? So I think that's the biggest thing with our academy is it's just like when you're always looking forward and you're always prepping for the future, there's always something to do, and you're never dwelling on the past or dwelling on what could have been or anything like that, right? So I think it's just like a mindset that we have here at our academy.
Gotcha. So you've been doing this a while with the girls prep team. I'm curious, what's the hardest conversation that you've had with a player?
Yeah, I've had like there's always tough ones for sure. And as a coach, you always have tough conversations, but I think like the toughest thing I've ever had to do, I was coaching Team BC at this time for the national championships, and I had to cut one of my own players, right? So you have to cut a player for Team BC. We end up going to Team BC Winter Games, first time ever BC won Winter Games, and then have to come back and be able to face, you know, the player, the parents, those types of things, because she was a great player. She plays NCAA. She was a great player. It just is like the way that those things kind of fall down. And, you know, kids have to have good camps too, and they have to be able to provide those things too. But at the end of the day, like she was an awesome kid. And it was just one of those things that really affected me. Just because it's like I put her through the whole process. She's always provided. She's worked her hardest. But that's something like to this day that I still like cringe about having to go through there. It helped me, you know, as a coach to go coach that winter games team and probably provided me more opportunities to gain knowledge that way. But at the end of the day, it came at the expense of having to like go through that process of having to cut one of your own players that you've worked so hard with for 2 years to be able to build up and get her a scholarship and push her to bigger and better things. And then you kind of have to rebuild that relationship a little bit, right? So that was definitely a tough one from my front. And in comparison, it's just like no other conversations are really going to be as tough as that, right? It's just like you're kind of crushing a kid's dream that, you know, you've just built up yourself, right? So that's just one that you just never can take back for sure.
Yeah, stinks to be on both sides of that conversation. I get it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's just talk about if you know, folks are listening or watching this podcast, you know, and they're interested in Rink Hockey Academy. You know, how do you recruit players, and what is the admissions process?
Yeah, for sure. There's a few different things with us academies, and especially in Canada. Like again, I don't know how US works, but we're very much throughout our season. You know, tampering is a big thing. So, families, if they reach out, we have a on our website that you're able to kind of apply, or that you can reach out to send an inquiry, which we can give more information on the academy and things like that. Throughout the season, you know, you're not allowed to actively recruit, right? Everyone's kind of like with their players, and there's a certain timeline that after playoffs, then that all conversations can be opened. So again, for us, it's a waiting game, right? Like you never know. You're trying to just almost internally see what players are coming back. And for us, it's definitely a little bit different. Like OHA has two teams, right? So their bottom team can feed to their top team. Like Shattuck U16 can move up to Shattuck 19. Like we're one of the only teams throughout North America, whether it's a blessing or whether it's a curse, it's just allowed us to focus solely on the 20 that we have. And those spots become so valuable, right? It's not like, okay, well, you played on our U16, now you can go, you know, like, and the entitlement there, it's like every kid and every parent and those positions are so specific, because to allow your kids to be the best that they can be, you really have to go through that process, and you have to interview the parents, and you have to interview the kid, and you got to make sure that they're there for the right reasons. And they'll help your program, right? We're not just doing it year to year and going, okay, well, this year we'll just won't be. It's like every year is it has to be a great year for us, right? So it's like you're trying to provide and look and see where your roster. So internally, you know, you look at ice time, you look at where kids can move up, because when you bring kids into your program, you also have to say what you provide and then provide it. Like actions speak louder than words. It's one thing for us to, you know, say something and then you don't follow through on it. So for us, it's really looking to fill the pieces and fill the age gaps and fill the years, right? Like a younger kid in our on our team might not play as much, but they also might play more too. It just really depends on the skill level and the and where kids come into the lineup, and everything here is earned too, right? It's not like we have a feeder team that it's like, okay, we'll kind of slowly put you along. It's like if someone comes into our program and is you know, leading everything in the gym and is a great leader and is providing the opportunity on the ice, they're going to get a little few more opportunities, a few more looks on the ice as well, right? But back to that kind of admissions process, it's like there's not a lot of spots every year to fill because we don't have that feeder team coming up, and it's like try to fill out the age gaps where you're graduating 5 or 6 kids and you only have to bring in 5 or 6 kids. It doesn't work all the time, but typically that's how it's kind of gone. So, throughout the year, you're trying to get lists together. You're trying to, look at those inquiries. And then what we do too is we host one of the biggest showcases. It could be as big as some of Pippi's showcases, right? So our RHA Kelowna University Showcase last year had 36 NCAA schools at it in the small arena that's behind you. We fill it with 7 teams. It's all kids from all across Western Canada, California, um, you know, Arizona, like all the kind of the Western states, and they all kind of come up to that showcase. And that's another way for exposure to happen for those kids in Western Canada and in the Western states. But for us to be able to get eyes on kids and then have them come up and see what we do here, right? We provide skill sessions throughout that camp so they can see what kind of skills we perform at Rink. They get to do a school tour, they get to skate with the team if they want, just to see if it's a fit, right? So for us, it's not really a rushed process. It's more or less, if we know that there's interest, we can get the parents here, we can get the kids here and see if it's a fit, right? Like, I think that's been the biggest thing for us. We're just not like, I didn't want it to be a place where you just sign up the next player and that's it, right? Like, it's just, I wanted to be a place where kids that really wanted to be the best players they can be and wanted to be the best teammates they can be would come here, and we would teach them the life skills they need to be successful, to graduate and to be successful at the next level, right? So for us, it's like I take recruiting very seriously. I have lists upon lists upon lists. I know kid after kid after kid. I follow, like this morning, I was on scrolling through my phone first thing when I wake up, scrolling through scores, scrolling through different things. It's just like one of those things that there's been years where the best players have come across my plate and I just, they might not have had the best track records, or I haven't heard the best things. And sometimes it just isn't a fit that way, right? Like, we're trying to get all like-minded kids together on the same ice that are going to work hard, that are going to push each other, that are going to have fun. And that's the only way that you can really do it, especially when you only have one team, like one female team. You need to make sure that the camaraderie is there and that the culture is super strong, right? Like, I think that's the one thing in female hockey, once I changed from male hockey, is that I heard so many horror stories of like so and so, like, you always hear like A, the coaches too, but like B, like the kids just don't get along. And I could never be a part of that. As a hockey player growing up, I was a captain for many of my teams. So leadership has to be, and being a good teammate has to be the number one thing. So I've always tried to bring in the best kids, because the best kids will make the best team for sure.
Gotcha. So, and Kris, you mentioned your female university showcase. That's in every year in May. Is that correct?
Yeah, April, usually right
Oh,
before
April.
the freeze period. There's, the weekends are still being agreed upon. So usually it happens in April right before the freeze period.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. I know it's on our calendar of events, but I can't remember exactly off the top of my head which one it is. Maybe it's the one in Winnipeg. That's in May. All right. All right. So my last question for you is: so we talked about how recruiting works for coming into RHA. How do you help with recruiting as players move on to play either at the U.S. college level, or obviously U Sports is an option? I know you got a lot of players playing at UBC for the Thunderbirds.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one thing that as a organization that we've kind of focused on as well, right? I know now that there's recruiting agencies, there's agents. A lot of that stuff has crept into the girls' game for right reasons too, right? Now there's different money that's involved and different recruitment tactics that are always changing that way. But essentially what I found when I switched from the guys side to the girls side, guys had agents. So your agents are talking to the Western League scouts, you're getting drafted, you're getting signed, boom, you're done. It's all set for you. Whereas when I moved over to the girls side, there just didn't seem to be a lot of that. And the ones that did it were a little bit like, I guess, had question marks around it, right? Like, you have a kid that's paying you money, so you're just trying to get them to a school and things like that. And I think schools really kind of can see through a lot of things. Like those coaches at the next level, like they know what kids need to come to their organizations and where they fit. And the last thing you want to do is like lie about a kid and then send a kid somewhere because then they won't trust you, right? So I think the biggest thing that I tried to do right from the start, I had to learn how it all worked, and it took a couple years to like understand that. But it's crazy, like how often I'm on this thing, and it's like, I can see on my phone now, I like every day there's like 4 or 5 schools text about this kid, like not just my kids, but kids in Western Canada. Hey, Kriss, do you know this kid from Alberta? Hey, Kriss, do you know, like, you're going to play selects? What did you think of this kid? Right. Like, so the more relationships that I built, it just kind of went to there, and I found out like what schools are looking for, what style of play do they like, what type of players do they like. And I kind of just kept building on that. And I thought that no other program focused on that as much. So one part that I really wanted to make sure of was that these girls were looked after and that someone had their back, right? Like it's one thing to go to NIT and play your games, but if no one is going to talk to schools for you, or like, hey, have a bug in those schools' ears, they're not going to be able to watch the right kids, and they're going to get bypassed, right? So I wanted to do a really good job on focusing on being able to put these girls in front of schools, and to be able to provide um, what other programs weren't doing, which was like that exposure and being able to talk and being able to have their backs, right? At the end of the day, all a kid wants to do is achieve their goals, and they want, as a coach, all you want to do is send your kid to the next level. Like for me, it's like we can go to NIT and go an 0-5, but if all my kids that don't have scholarships by the end of it, it's a successful trip, right? Like that's, I think at the end of the day, what I started to focus in on a lot more. Yeah, I love to win. Don't get me wrong. Like competitive guy, love to win, but like if those kids are moving on, and you've provided everything you can do for those kids, then that's what is able to have me sleep at night. You know what I mean? I just have, when I went through the Western League, when I went through my process, I've had tons of coaches. I've had great coaches. I've had not so great coaches. I've learned from all of those coaches in different ways. And I think at the end of the day, it's not, the kids don't care how much you know, it's like how much you care, right? And I think that's the one thing that we've kind of instilled here. So when we go play all these teams that are statistically on paper way better or have more commits and things like that, we always come out on top because these kids, they want to play for a coach they can trust. They want to play for a guy they'll run through a wall for, and for their teammates that they'll do the same, right? So I think it's just like for us here, we're kind of in a market where I just like I can't pull Ontario kids. Like they aren't even allowed to play for Team Ontario if they leave Ontario. So like there's
Oh,
different
wow.
rules about different things that I've obviously dealt with, but I need to be able to make sure when girls come here, they understand what they're up against in the States, what they're up against in Ontario, what they're up against in Boston, what they're up against internationally. So when they come here, they go to work and they're able to understand what the whole big scheme of things is, right? But um, back to your point too, it was just like I focused the program more on moving girls on than I did on winning, and that is what separates us at the end of the day. It's like kids want to come here because they know when they move on, A, they will move on. B, they will have the skills when they move on to continue to play, because you can go as a freshman, but if you didn't maintain those skills in grade 12, you're probably not going to play as a freshman, right? Like it's just the way it is. You have to continue to evolve. And then the third one is just like preparing them for the time management of what it's going to take to be a student athlete at the next level, right? So I think that's why colleges have really seen that kids coming out of our program are prepared, they're ready for the next level, they compete, and they have great leadership qualities. And I think those are all things that have helped us because, even in my right mind, I know that sometimes they're not as skilled as other kids, but what they make up for in character and what they make up for in work ethic just allows them to be the best players for sure. It's just a recipe for success. And, for me, that's all you can do is provide that service for them. You want to push them to bigger and better things. And at the end of the day, that makes you the best coach. It's not your X's and O's and your power play and those types of things. If your kids are getting scholarships and you're moving them on to bigger and better things, that's what makes you the best coach.
Yeah, it's all about development and then graduating them to the next level. So, Kris, I want to thank you so much for doing this. It was great learning all about your hockey background. Obviously, you enlightened me on how Western Canadian girls hockey works. Obviously, learning a lot about Rink, the Rink Hockey Academy, and then thank you so much for all this info about recruiting. It's definitely a bunch of information I did not know about. So, hopefully, our audience really appreciates all the detail that you provided. So, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's always fun to come out and Western Canada doesn't get enough credit for what we do out here. I think the leagues are getting better. Like the academy stream is getting better and better. The AAA teams are super strong every single year, as evident with the ECHL Cup. And anything we can do for Western Canadians out here to get them more exposure is great. So I appreciate you having me on the show. And if anyone has any questions or wants to follow up, you can provide my email. I'll be able to respond to any questions that way, or they can find it on your website too.
Yeah, I'll be putting all the information in the show notes. So, thanks again.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
I really want to thank Kris for coming on the podcast. It was great to hear about his hockey development, how girls hockey works in British Columbia, what it's like to attend Rink Hockey Academy, and the recruiting process. You can connect with Kris on the team website or via his Champs app profile. Links to both are in the show notes.